Is Avatar: The Last Airbender the best cartoon ever made? What real-life lessons can you learn from this children's animation? All that and more with my guest Luke Newton on this episode of the Fandom Portals podcast. Welcome to the Fandom Portals podcast, where curiosity finds community in a celebration of all things geek. In every episode, we dive deep and answer your favorite fandom questions in the time it takes you to slide through the mail chutes of a Marshu. I'm your host, Aaron Davies, and today we are answering the question, is Avatar: The Last Airbender the best cartoon ever made? Today, we're going to be focusing on Book 1, which is the Water Book, with Book 2 and Book 3 coming later on in the year. And this episode is going to focus on three main aspects that make this show the best. It's the character arc and developments, the layered plot and story structure, and the world building and lore. And this episode is part of our ongoing series in October called Animation Celebration. And we feature a community question with a focus on animation because we are celebrating the International Day of Animation on the 28th of October. Listeners, I want you to get ready for a very exciting deep dive with a very special guest. And I'm thrilled to welcome Luke Newton, an animation aficionado whose passion for Avatar is truly unmatched. Luke isn't just a lifelong friend. He's a walking encyclopedia of all things Avatar: The Last Airbender, from the rich lore of Ba Sing Se to the Northern Water Tribe character arcs that define the series, to the world building and mythology. Luke's deep knowledge and enthusiasm for Avatar will captivate you. Here he is. It's Luke Newton. How you going today, buddy?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks, Aaron. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. It's great to be here with you today. So we're talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender today, but your story with animation began way before you watched Avatar: The Last Airbender. So what sorts of animations did you watch? What's your story with animation? Where did it begin for you? What's your origin story?
So it sort of all began, I'd say, with Dragon Ball. That's pretty much where I got into how it all started to me. And then obviously when he had toasted TV as well growing up before school, eating cereal. So it was, pretty much, Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Like the main ones that was my introduction into like anime, I would say. And then all throughout high school and stuff, I always watched it because I had a lot of time on school holidays and stuff to watch anime. So yeah, that's pretty much how I got into it.
With Avatar: The Last Airbender, you sort of, we have a history of watching things together as well. And you came up for a visit one time and we started watching Star Wars Season 7, The Clone Wars, which is an animated series as well. And really exciting piece of television you showed me. And then we were actually going to do our topic on that, but eventually you came to the conclusion that you wanted to talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender. So it obviously holds a pretty special place in your heart if you think it's going to top that. So what's your introduction with Avatar: The Last Airbender? What do you think personally makes it so great?
For starters, the thing that makes it so great is the world, like the world they built, the characters, the lore, like all of those things combine, and they take a lot of inspiration from real life cultures and people, and they just sort of mesh it all together and it just works so well.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And there's been a lot of talk about Avatar in my peripheries for a very long time, but this is the first time I've kind of dove in and watched the whole thing front to back, start to finish. So I've also seen like episodes here and there, but never watched it from episode 1, book 1, all the way through. Full disclosure to the listeners, I am up to the start of the second book now. So today, Luke and I are going to be talking spoilers, obviously spoilers. It's a 2006 series, but it's we're deep diving onto book 1, which is the Book of Water. And we are going to be talking about those themes, those lessons, the world building, and also some of the character arcs of book 1, but not going any further because we want to do the second book and the third book in other episodes of the Fandom Portals podcast, which will be released later this year. So to start off with, Luke, you mentioned that some of the aspects of the world building of Avatar really draw you to the cartoon itself. So one thing for me is the four nations and their cultures. So can you give us a bit of a brief rundown of the four cultures, the four nations, and some of the things that define those four cultures as we are introduced to these for the first time in book 1?
With Avatar, you've got the four nations, you've got the water, earth, fire, and air. And obviously we're introduced to book 1 being water, and we're in the South Pole. So we get first introduced to waterbenders, and not actually waterbenders because we don't actually see a waterbender proper until later on in the series. But, Katara is doing her first sort of movements of becoming a waterbender. You can see that when she gets in arguments with Sokka and whatnot. But yeah, so you have your water, and then you've got your earth, and then your fire, air. Obviously, we see airbending through Aang, and we see earthbending and firebending through further characters in the series, but also Zuko as well in the second episode. So obviously they are separated, like first off is like by colors. Obviously they got blue for water, green for earth, red for fire, and like yellowy orange for air. I guess what really separates them is the way they are as a people and culture. Your firebenders are much more like sort of like imperial, sort of like China, Japan-esque. Your earthbenders are, all their structures are built from earth by them. Waterbenders obviously surround themselves with water, North Pole, South Pole, swamps. And then you obviously get your air nomads, which are up in the mountains and usually high above, highly elevated above everyone else. So that's sort of what separates them. And their cultures are very different as well. So obviously, your water benders, they're more of they're focused on community, focused on the tribe, the people. And then obviously with your, we don't know too much about the air nomads as of book 1 because we are only seeing it through what we see with Aang.
And I think as you were saying about the Fire Nation, they're probably, well, from what I can see, to be the most technologically advanced tribe or culture, almost taking that industrial side with their warships and obviously using iron a lot more than any other culture. It's kind of really pushed them forward, you could say, in their territorial expanse, which is another big theme of the Avatar universe that is introduced to you pretty early. I think by episode 2, actually probably even episode 1, you're introduced to the fact that there is a historical conflict or 100-year war that's been going on between the Fire Nation and everybody else. So even in the introduction, the Katara voiceover says the Fire Nation attacked, and that 100-year war is kind of going on. So across the series, there has been lots of impact on that war.
There is that voiceover that has been at war for 100 years, and a lot of people viewed the Fire Nation as the enemy. No one likes like firebenders, and you don't really see too many firebenders that are not affiliated with the Fire Nation. So it's really sort of impacted. You see as season 1 goes on, you can see that they've taken over like a lot of like few like towns of the Earth Kingdom. And you can see that they're slowly trying to like invade and take Earth Kingdom territory. They haven't had any success with the major cities of the Earth Kingdom as of yet. So throughout the book, you can see that they sort of envelop and take over everything that they sort of touch, and they also like capture Earth Kingdom citizens and use them to work for them as well.
Yeah, and I saw that really apparent in sort of episode 3, the Southern Air Temple, when they're like learning about the devastation of the Fire Nation, and Aang goes in and sees for the first time, the impact that they've had. And also in episode 1 or 2, when he's in the water South Pole with Katara, and he's seeing, the Fire Nation ship that's sort of booby trapped, and obviously Zuko's on his way down to try and find the Avatar. So let's actually talk a little bit about that lore of the Avatar. So can you tell us a little bit about who the Avatar is, what is surrounding that Avatar mythos, and what's his job in the series?
Yeah, of course. Well, the Avatar is a person that can wield all 4 elements. They are a bridge between the physical world and the spirit world, and they're meant to keep balance between the 4 nations. So that's the whole purpose of the Avatar. And the thing that the Avatar is quite respected in the world because they are aware of the wisdom and the power that the Avatar like holds, and they're also aware of like the significance of having an Avatar. So it's like reincarnation. So they know that it's like they've had several lives, and they can also tap into those past lives as well. Yeah, I think that the Avatar is pretty much the central grounding point for all 4 nations, and it keeps each nation in check for those type of things. And you can see when he's not there, when he vanishes, the Fire Nation invades, starts a 100-year war, and because the Avatar wasn't around, like it's just been unchecked for a century essentially.
Yeah, and then the impact of that culturally and also throughout the nation has gone through as well, like seeing lots of people displaced and lots of people's villages just sort of taken over, with the Fire Nation moving straight through the Earth Nation, obviously taking more and more. quite a few instances through book one where they talk to us about the law of the spirit world. And you mentioned before that the Avatar keeps the balance or is the connection or the bridge between the spirit world and the regular world. And in book one, we see Avatar sort of play with that balance a little bit.
In book one, we do have a couple of different journeys to the spirit world. One being obviously when the Haybot attacks that village due to, them burning down the forest and whatnot. So you see that interaction there, and that spirits taking villages to the spirit world. And then we also see it later on when Aang speaks to Roku as well, and also when he goes to the spirit oasis in the end, like in the final episodes of season one. I like that. And the spirit world is like, we get told that Aang can't use airbending or any bending in the spirit world. So, and when he is in the spirit world, like his body can't be moved. Otherwise he will, come back to the physical plane. And it's implied that it is actually quite hard, or it can be quite hard to get to the spirit world, depending on like what kind of avatar you are. As we do see that some avatars have struggled with being able to tap into that spiritual sort of side, whereas Aang, being an airbender monk, he's already mastered that sort of side to being the avatar. So he's good at going in and out of the spirit world.
And through the episodes as well, you do see that he is quite naturally gifted in terms of his own bending skill. He picks up water bending quite quickly in the middle sort of episodes of the book as well. And then also, that spirit journey through episodes 7 and 8 in the winter solstice episodes is really apparent as well. And that's where the season sort of kicks off in my eyes in terms of the really sort of overarching narrative of the Avatar's role in this world. So obviously he's there to keep the peace, and he knows that the Fire Nation is on the march. There was some talk about a comet that was occurring through book one, and there was that astrological event that sort of did something with the Fire Nation.
Yeah. So it's called Sozin's Comet, and essentially what happens is it was the comet that was used to first start the war. So it was used to wipe out the air nomads. And essentially, when Aang visits Roku at the solstice at his temple, he pretty much explains that the comet is going to come back again. Like usually it takes years for the Avatar to master all 4 bendings, but he's going to have to do it by summer's end if he wants to stop Fire Nation before Sozin's Comet arrives. It pretty much enhances Firebender's abilities. It pretty much gives them like a times 100 buff, you could say, on all their bending. So they're pretty much the very like just your common foot soldier has the bending of like a firebending master. So like imagine a firebending master with that type of power as well. It's like they're very hard to go up against.
Yeah, so that would give lots of people throughout the realms a big sense of anxiety because they're already hard to beat as it is with their advanced technology, given the fact that they're empowered by the comet. It's a ticking time bomb, you might say. Sort of emboldens that connection to nature that a lot of the different tribes have as well, because at the end of the series in book one, there was obviously the connection to the moon and the water tribe. So there is that sort of theme going on as well, that there is that sort of spirituality with and the balance between the natural world and how we live in it as well as people and as benders. We'll move on now talking about the themes, and we might actually jump into having a chat about some of the nuances of this cartoon, because one of the most important and amazing features of this is its layered sort of plot structure and storytelling, because we are getting the tale of Avatar and his 2 friends going off and trying to learn the 4 elements and stop this 100-year war. But underneath all that, we're also getting various different lessons about responsibility and duty, about accepting loss, about the balance of power and different sorts of ways that we can feel compassion. There's talks about gender equality as well, and various different stereotype breakings and friendships and trust and all that kind of things. One example that I sort of took as being one of my sort of favorite episodes was an episode that talked about the importance of trust, and it was the episode 10 titled Jet, and it was when Aang and Katara and Sokka met that group of individuals that were sort of resistant to the Fire Nation, and then they'd go in and they'd sort of take various different things from the Fire Nation people just to survive themselves. And Katara was very enamored by the character of Jet, and it was only realized later on that Sokka's resistance to them was because, the character of Jet actually showed quite a bit of prejudice on every level towards the Fire Nation. We said before that not many people associated with the Fire Nation aren't with their agenda. But in this case, they did meet one, and there was a lot of prejudice sort of put against that person. And that's a really sort of adult concept to put in a really, 9 to 14-year-old sort of level cartoon. So it does that a few times throughout the series.
On that, I just wanted to add that, like you said, they met those freedom fighters, and they're really infatuated with them and the work they do. They believe that they're doing what's just for the cause. And then, like you said, there is a lot of prejudice towards anyone with anything to do with the Fire Nation. Like just like the old man that they found, like his Fire Nation, and Jet is very they're very, like you said, like heavily prejudiced against them. And I think that's to their own detriment too, because you can't make you can't distinguish the difference between like just hurting people for the sake of hurting people and like actual firebenders and the Fire Nation, if that makes sense. So he just associates all under one big umbrella. And it's good to see that, that it's like when he goes to flood that town and he's successful, and then you find out that Sokka actually went to the town and said, hey, look, this is going to happen. Like, it's not just about trying to destroy the Fire Nation or trying to hurt them. It's about just not trying to like hurt innocent people who shouldn't be involved in it. There are plenty of examples in the season, but I think I sort of get my most value from the character of Iroh in that sense. So he teaches. He's got a lot of great one-liners and a lot of great like little passages of speech that are really like insightful and actually you can use in everyday life, like as a person in the real world. It's like, if I actually think of that and try and live by that or try and use that, then it's good advice just for like kids and adults of any age,
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Iroh is definitely one of the wisest characters I've ever seen in a cartoon. And one of the most enduring qualities for him, Iroh being obviously the uncle of Zuko, he's extremely loyal to his nephew. And through the series, I also got this vibe that he was respected general, and then obviously gave that up for the love of his family. That's like a really, kind sort of quality for him to have, and obviously forsaking that duty once again for familial loyalty for a kid like Zuko. And, when we first meet Zuko, he doesn't appear to be worth what Iroh is feeding into him until later on in the series. So he's definitely one of those characters that you can really sort of get behind, and he's nuanced and interesting to watch develop because, he seems to be very kind, but he's also referred to and respected by people in the Fire Nation.
Yes, well, he's known as the Dragon of the West, essentially. He was a general in the Fire Nation. We get a little bit more information surrounding Iroh further in the series, so I've tried to not spoil anything for you or anyone who hasn't seen it just yet. But we do get sort of like everyone in the Fire Nation seems like for the war, and then you get this character Iroh, who's royalty of the Fire Nation, and he seems to just go against everything that we've seen in the Fire Nation. Like he's kind, he's patient, he's wise, and he's there for Zuko, and he doesn't really seem inherently bad at all, or like he wants to cause any destruction or wants to invade anyway. He seems to just want to be there for Zuko. So we do find out that Iroh has had a bit of a past, but I don't want to get into it just yet because it is explored a bit more further on.
Yep, yeah. And they do mention as well that he did try to assail Ba Sing Se a few times, but obviously he failed, or that's the story that's going around from General Zhao. My favorite moment from Zuko is in the King of Amashu episode 5, when he actually suggests to Zuko, take some time, have some tea, don't focus on your mission so much. And it really highlights that sort of philosophy and balance of patience, where Zuko's this really obsessive sort of kid in his nature and his quest to try and find the Avatar. And Iroh's that really sort of calming presence. We talked about episode 12, The Storm, and that's kind of when Iroh really stands up for Zuko in a moment amongst his men. So I think that was a really sort of catalyzing episode 12, where we really got to see the backstory of Iroh and Zuko.
So The Storm is probably my favorite episode of book one, probably, I'd say. Obviously, the finale is great, but this one here really gives a lot more depth to a really one-dimensional character up to this point. Up until this point, it's just about finding the Avatar, capturing the Avatar. He doesn't seem to really care about anybody else. Doesn't care about his uncle. Doesn't care about the safety of his crew, which is mentioned in that episode. So the storm really gives us a deeper dive into Zuko, but also Aang at the same time. I really love how that episode is like portrayed as like we're getting the backstories of our two sort of main like the protagonists and antagonists. You know, we're getting those two backstories told at the same time, and the duality of it all is actually like amazing. I love how it's structured this episode. You find out that Zuko, you know, he wants to lead the nation. He's very young and enthusiastic. He wants to go into this war meeting, and the guy's not letting him pass. But then, you know, Iroh obviously said, please, yeah, you can go in and just don't say anything, because, you know, these old people can be a bit sensitive. And then obviously he's listening to the plan of the commander in the war room, and he's saying that we'll send a battalion in to the Earth Kingdom to assault the front lines. And they're like, well, you're not going to do it. They're brand new recruits. You're not going to be able to. They're not going to make any difference. And then the commander goes, yeah, of course, that's the point. They're fresh meat. We're going to put them as bait, and then we'll attack from the rear. And then Zuko obviously stands up for all those soldiers and says, hey, how can you just throw their lives away like that? Like, they love and respect our nation. Like, how can we do that to them? And then you find out, obviously, he has an Agni Kai with who he thinks is going to be the general, but then it's actually, you know, his father. And then, you know, Ozai, voiced tremendously by Mark Hamill, says, you know, suffering, you will learn respect, and suffering will be your teacher. And then he like obviously does the burn mark that we see. And then in that same token, we have Aang, who, you know, found out to be the Avatar, and which is also really cool because he picks the 4 Avatar relics from 1,000 different toys, and it's all toys from his past lives, and that's how they found out that he's the Avatar. But he gets told that he's the Avatar prior to him being 16, which is the custom age that you would find out that you are the Avatar, because the air nomads are fearing that there's going to be war upon them. And then obviously, you know, Aang starts getting treated differently by his friends. He can't play games because he's the Avatar now, so it's an unfair advantage. And then you have, you know, he's training and learning with his monk mentor Gyatso, and then you have the other air nomads trying to pull him away from Gyatso and say he has to train, and can't have fun anymore. And like, then he abandons his people, and then he obviously falls into the ocean when the storm, and then he freezes. So like, you have those two. You start finding out that Aang is just confused, and like, he just doesn't really want to be the Avatar at this point. And then you find out that Zuko does actually have a caring personality and a caring heart, because the reason why he is banished and the reason why he has the scar is because he cared about, you know, that battalion of soldiers. So, but then for his crew to find out about that, it's like a different level of sort of respect. And then you sort of see at the end of the episode when they're in that storm, you know, the Avatar comes and his lieutenant goes, what do you want to do, sir? Like, do you want to follow the Avatar? And he goes, no, let's get the ship to safety, prioritizing the safety of the crew. And that's another good lesson that it teaches as well, that it teaches, like, you know, just because you see something in front of you that you really want or you can get, sometimes it's better to help others around you before you just go after what you want.
Oh, I agree. I think that was really well said. And the episode 12 is definitely like a turning point as well for both characters and for viewers too, because as you said, you know, you see Zuko as being a completely one-dimensional character who's really sort of aggressive in his pursuit of the Avatar. And then we see Aang as this sort of childish, roguish little boy with the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. And then we find out that both of these characters, who seem so different, actually have something completely in common in the fact that they really just care for their people and really just want to, you know, live their lives and be fun. But the burden of responsibility is pushed upon them. Zuko wanting his responsibility and then being burned literally for it, and then Aang slowly warming up to the fact that this is his role in the world. I think that episode is really sort of pivotal in both of their representations.
Yeah, Katara goes to Aang, like, you know, you give people hope. Like, you know, people see the Avatar and they hear about your return, and it gives people hope. But it's crazy because he also gives Zuko hope, because, like, but for a completely different reason. Like, he needs to capture him. And like, the Avatar gives Zuko hope, but not in the traditional sense that everyone's talking about. So I think that's also very interesting as well.
Yeah, that element of hope, where the hope for Zuko sits in his possible redemption and the return of his honor. And, you know, that's kind of saddening as well, you know, looking at that and just seeing Zuko as this character that's really chasing the love of his father. Like, he's really just trying to be approved by the man that he obviously reveres, and he's just falling short every single time. And that's what really made the touching moments between himself and Iroh, they really just hit that much more for me. You know, seeing how Iroh said that he considers Zuko as one of his own, and Zuko saying, I know that as well. One of the most amazing parts of that episode, and also heading back towards Iroh, we see him as this sort of calming and solid presence, always there to relax and remind Zuko about the different sorts of peaceful things in life that he should definitely consider. But there would be an element of responsibility that he feels, because he said to Zuko, go into that room, but don't say anything. So perhaps that plays a part in why Iroh's following Zuko around in this moment as well. I do like in the finale, though, talking about how characters change. If we look at how Iroh's represented through the whole series, and then at the very end, very Fire Nation loyal in terms of him being in general, and then obviously being attached to Zuko. He then goes against the Fire Nation to protect the moon spirit in the last 2 episodes of book 1, when we're talking about the North Pole attack. And he actually cuts sick. You can see him be very aggressive. That power is there, and you can see actually why. And that was the first moment where I clicked and I said, okay, he's a general because he's extremely powerful. Whereas before that, there was just the whispers of what he had done in the past, which made me really curious about the character too.
Especially because you also hear from other characters that, Zhao goes, yes, I've heard of you, how you feel the spirits and how you've even gone to the spirit world yourself. And he seems to have a really close affinity for the spirits, with the spirits. He seems to really sort of hold that to a very high sort of standard in his life. He doesn't mess with the spirits, and he's very in touch with that sort of side of the world.
Did you want to talk about Zhao?
Yeah. Zhao, he's seriously, he's just the embodiment of the Fire Nation, of why people hate the Fire Nation. He's reckless. He uses his fire without control. He is very ambitious. He's overzealous. He just is too ambitious for his own good. He finds out obviously about the moon, and the ocean spirits, Tui and La, and then he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna go to the North Pole and I'm gonna kill the moon spirit. And obviously that's just nuts. You know what I mean? It's not the whole world needs the moon, not just the water tribe. But you can see the way he when he becomes commander, he gets those archers to capture Aang, and when he goes down the river, he burns down all his boats because he doesn't have any control. And we find out that he used to be Zhongzhong's student, which is a firebender that Aang meets, the first firebender we meet that has rebelled against the Fire Nation as well. Yeah. And just on Zhongzhong, I really like his character as well. I think he's a really good character. My first couple of viewings of the show, I was like, he's all right. But then, lately I've become around to him. He's such an interesting character. And I really like that, he thinks that fire is destruction, caused harm. It's death. It spreads everywhere.
I think that the episode 16, The Deserter, was really good for me in terms of the differences between Zhao and Zhongzhong, because that difference really highlights how putrid Zhao really is. So Zhongzhong's obviously gone through some lessons with the Fire Nation. He's obviously deserted, and he's seen the destructive sort of element of that Fire Nation and the ferocity in which they use their bending powers. So I really liked how he mentioned how the firebending element is the only element that is actually alive, you might say. So after you bend earth, or after you bend air, or after you bend water, it ceases to operate or move. But once you push fire into existence, if you have no control over that, it will take on a life of its own, and it will destroy, and it will move. And that's kind of a metaphor for the Fire Nation as a whole, as it spreads across the landscape and tries to take on everybody and everything. So Zhongzhong is also a really wise character. And prior to watching the Avatar series, I was really fond of earthbenders, but now I'm really leaning towards firebenders as my favorite, because especially the ones like Zhongzhong that take that control and know the power that they wield and really sort of harness it and take care of it and make sure that they're doing the right thing. But then you juxtapose that, or you couple that with Admiral Zhao, or General Zhao as he becomes, and Aang uses it against him so much that he basically blasts the whole river and the forest system around him apart, because he has no control. He has no foresight. And he's using the fire power for power alone. And that is, he rises through the ranks because he's powerful, but, he's also lacking discipline, which is what those characters of Zhongzhong and Iroh highlight. He's
also a bit of a too, you see when he has that Agni Kai with Zuko, and Zuko beats him fair and square, and he goes, do it. And he puts a flame beside his head instead of hitting him. And then he walks away. And then as he's walking away, he tries to do like a shot to his back, and obviously Iroh intercepts him and says, my nephew has more honor than you'll ever have, type thing. And then but he doesn't care about honor or that anything like that. All he wants is to further his own ambition and go high through the ranks. So yeah, he like also when he uses the pirates as well to blow up Zuko's like quarters and his ship, like he just uses really like cowardly methods to get what he wants.
Yeah, that underhanded sort of nature as well. Yeah, you know what? I think that deserter episode really sort of changed my perspective of firebenders and changed my perspective of Zhao especially. And did you know he was voiced by Jason Isaacs, who's Lucius Malfoy?
Yes, very cool, very cool.
Crazy.
There's a few cool voice actors that pop up throughout the show, which is really cool.
Yeah, no, I like that. All right, let's move away from our Fire Nation characters because we've covered Iroh, we've covered Zhao. I feel like there's a lot more to say about Zuko.
A lot I want to say about Zuko, but it really, his character arc really goes over all three books. So I'm just trying to keep it very centric to book one.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more that we'll talk about with Zuko as we go on, because Zuko is I would say him, Iroh, and Kyoshi are my three favorite characters in the whole series.
Yeah,
definitely have a lot to say about Zuko. I will say in book one that he does, by the end of it, you're sort of like not rooting for him, but you're like happy to see where he ends up. Like he's ended up even the last scene where like he's beaten Zhao and he tried to have him killed, and then the ocean spirit grabs Zhao, and even after all that, he puts out his hand to try and like save him because that's who Zuko is. You know what I mean? And yeah, obviously he's gone through a lot of turmoil. Yes, that's such an early age, but yeah, definitely keen to speak more about him like further.
Yeah, absolutely. So pin in this space, watch this space for book 2 and book 3 where we talk in depth about Zuko, but you can start to see like little tidbits of his kindness and his change, I guess you could say. Like I haven't seen book 2 or book 3, but his arc is so famous that I have heard things about it and I'm very keen to watch it and very keen to see. But yes, we'll talk about him later on.
Yes.
Moving towards probably one of my favorite characters, let's talk about Sokka. Now, he's introduced to us as the comic relief, but he changes as the series goes on quite fundamentally as well.
Yeah. Sokka, he's like watching the first book, especially like in 2024, early on in the series, he's very sexist. He's very sort of pig-headed in the way he sort of goes about doing things. So sometimes there's a bit of a hard watch, and it's like, he is that character, but no, it doesn't age well. But what it does give him is it does give him a massive payoff when you see him start growing as a character. So obviously, I think his first big growth would be, like you said, the Kyoshi episode where he finds out like, where were the men that ambushed us? And it's like, there were no men, it was us. And it's just like, oh, there's no way like a bunch of girls did that. And then, you find out that, I should be treating you like a warrior instead of treating you like a girl, like he was. And then you can see that Sokka he's very like, I don't know, you're sort of like the cynic of the group, I'd say, especially like with the fortune telling episode. Yeah. I really like that episode because, Sokka obviously doesn't believe any of it. And I'm also in that same mindset. I don't know if I actually believe in fortunes and whatnot. So I sort of related, I felt like I was the Sokka of that episode. So you can sort of see that like he's very sort of based in reality and doesn't really like buy into much of he calls waterbending like magic water. And he's like always thinking about meat and his stomach, and he's like that very
He's the human character, isn't he? He sort of grounds everybody.
Yeah, well, he's like the non-bender of the group,
Yeah.
But I think he definitely does, like he grows in that episode with the Kyoshi warriors. He grows, in that episode with Jet. He grows and further on as well in the series. But the growth he does from the start of the book to the end of the book is like a lot, and he only continues to grow as well throughout the series. But yeah, I think Sokka is a great character. I think his one-liners and comedic value is definitely sometimes can be understated.
Yeah, he's definitely, he gets to me a lot of the times, like when he gets sick after the episode The Storm and he's there all wrapped up and Katara's looking after him, and then he's just like, what's great about Appa? Sense of humor.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
And then after that, he's just like, Appa growls or something, and he's just like, classic Appa. It's just funny.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he's funny like that. I like that he's just like in the fortune telling episode where he's just like, "Can your science explain why it rains?" And he goes, "Yes, yes, it can." And he's just like, when the Auntie Wu says, "You'll be wearing these shoes when you meet the love of your life," and he goes, "Okay, and how many days have you been wearing it?" I was like, "Every day since I got the fortune." I was like, "Well, then of course it's going to come true."
Of course, it's coming true. Yeah,
yeah. And then it's like, we said the town wouldn't be destroyed by the volcano, and it wasn't. And he goes, "I hate you," because technically it's right. It didn't get destroyed, but like it's only because they went out of their way to make it happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we can't move on from Sokka before we talk about his wisdom and his tactics and his strategic brain, because the amount of times that he said through the series, "I have a plan," you can't count it. But he's definitely, even though he's presented as that comedic sort of character, it's also coupled again with something quite opposite, which is that sort of wise plan maker. And I feel like that sort of originates from his father, who's a very respected leader in the water tribe. Very much respects the warrior sort of job that he has, and he respects strength in lots of different ways, whether it be sort of mental strength or whether it be like strength of arm. But he's just that very sort of tactile but also tactical character, and the plans that he comes up with are really quite town saving on occasion as well.
He's usually the one doing the schedule. He's doing all that type of stuff. The sort of stuff that you don't really see, and you sort of just see the spectacle of Katara and Aang and the Benders and how they do everything. But he is a quite capable leader and warrior in his own right, and you do see that throughout the series. He isn't afraid to take on any sort of Fire Nation soldiers, regardless if they're Benders or not. You know what I mean? So there is a lot to say. Sokka's also one of those characters as well that grows throughout the series. So it's really hard to speak about him in like the void of like just in the closed space of book one. But yeah, like you said, he is that non-bender that we sort of relate to, because we don't bend either. So he's the character that we most relate to in that sense.
Yeah,
exactly.
No, I agree. I think my favorite Sokka moment is his portrayal through the last 2 episodes in the final battles of the Siege of the North, part 1 and part 2, where he obviously falls for Princess Yue. Is it Yue?
Yeah, Yue.
Yeah, falls for Princess Yue, and obviously she's got her devotion to duty, which he respects but also questions. And then he finds out that Han, who is part of the Northern Waterbending Warriors, is actually engaged to marry her. And, he does fight with her initially, but he's also very understanding of the fact that he has a duty, and for the betterment of the people, he will impart his knowledge of the Fire Nation onto these individuals so he can help, despite the fact that he knows that Han's going to get all the credit for it. And obviously he loves Yue very much, but he sort of self-sacrifices in that moment too, which shows at the end his sort of emotionality, but also his leadership as well, which I imagine would only grow through book 2 and 3.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think, I think Sokka, you see, I have seen a lot of reviews and I've heard a lot of people speak about Avatar, and Sokka is, I'd say, one of those characters that doesn't get mentioned as much, but definitely, what he brings to the series, is like exponential. I think, the show would definitely be worse off if he wasn't in it at all.
I agree. And then we'll go to Katara. So she's presented to us as this eager, sometimes tempestuous but kind-hearted girl at the start of the series, a South Pole dwelling waterbender. She and her brother Sokka obviously find the Avatar, and by the end of the series, she sort of plays this crucial role in the North.
She's one of those characters that she's like always on like the morally sort of good side of everything, except for there's a couple moments where she's like when she steals the waterbending scroll from the pirates, and like she does have a couple moments where she's a bit self-centered in a sense, but for like 99% of the series, she's very that sort of morally good character. Sometimes too morally good. Sometimes it's to her own detriment. Sometimes it's like it can be a little bit annoying, as we find out later on in the series as well. But I think being that she's sort of like helps Aang sort of reaccustom to the world as it is today. She's sort of like his guide in a sense, and Aang obviously has a lot of respect for Katara because he has a massive like crush on her. So
he
like,
gains
anything that she says is like right. Anything that because he obviously has a lot of fondness for her, so he's always going to be inclined to sort of go along with her whatever she wants to do. So I think Katara really adds a lot to to the series. I think that she's a great, as in the end episode, we find out that she's now a waterbending master, and that she's going to be Aang's waterbending teacher from now on. So you can see that she from the start of book one to the end of book one, she grows a lot as a bender, as a character as well. And you can also see that Katara is like very resourceful, and she's very she doesn't believe in the resourceful, determined, and she doesn't believe in a lot of the customs of the North as well. Like obviously when they go up there, they find out that like women can't be actual waterbending warriors; they have to be healers, which she finds ridiculous because throughout the whole series she's been battling to get up to the North Pole to learn waterbending from a master. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I feel like Katara and Sokka both play very important roles in educating Aang on how he's going to be the Avatar, because Aang is presented to us as that sort of very youthful spirit. And, you know, Sokka has that comedic value in him, but he also has that wisdom and that tactical sort of side that Aang needs to adopt in times when he needs to lead people and be the Avatar. But Katara has that determined but also maternal sort of nature of caring and kindness, which also couples really well as the both of them combine to be the Avatar's biggest teachers and influences. And I think that's probably the best thing that those two characters do in terms of their role in the show. They really sort of complement Aang's journey. And you know, it's written that way, but I don't think two better people would have found Aang to, you know, train him.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, 100%.
So now let's talk about the man himself, the man of the hour, Aang, the Avatar, the Airbender, the last one of his kind. We meet him as a carefree, playful boy, pretty irresponsible, a little bit unaware of the war's magnitude until, you know, the series sort of goes on. And through this series, he kind of struggles with the weight of the responsibility that's put on him as the Avatar. Actually, even before the series, as we see in flashbacks, you know, when he's granted the status of Avatar at that very early age, he struggles with that responsibility and struggles with accepting that responsibility as well.
Yeah, that's true. He comes. We first meet him. He's just a goofy kid, really. All he wants to do is go penguin sledding. And even when they need to go to the North Pole, he wants to stop at all these places and, you know, ride the elephant koi and all that type of stuff. Like he's just a very kind-hearted, free sort of spirit. And you know, the role of the Avatar doesn't seem to really suit him. But we do find out that you know, he does sort of grow into it a little bit better as the series goes on. But yeah, especially in book one, he's very sort of doesn't want to be the Avatar. But you know, and he doesn't, like you said, he doesn't really understand the weight of the war until really he gets back to the Southern Air Temple and sees Gyatso's skeleton there, and then he just like loses it and goes into the Avatar state and just is like, without Katara there to calm him down, he, you know, who knows what happens, you know what I mean? Yeah. So I think, and then he carries around that guilt as well from like abandoning the world, I guess, for 100 years. He like, especially up until the Storm episode, you can see he carries that around a fair bit. And then he's also got to deal with people like saying, "Where have you been for the last 100 years?" He's got a lot to sort of on his plate. And then he also, when he finds Roku, and then finally figures out that, like, you know, the comet's coming back, and he's got to learn and master all these elements before summer's end. And you just like, you know, if it wasn't hard before, it's certainly harder now. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, and I think his learning, as you mentioned, his learning comes from lots of different spaces, and it happens in lots of different ways. You know, the main arc of the story is him learning the 4 elements, but he's also learning how to be kind, and he's learning how to treat people, and he's learning how to view Fire Nation deserters in a way that isn't sort of stereotypical. And then he's also sort of learning how to let go of grief and loss, and he's doing this all at the humble age of 12. And it sort of highlighted heaps. His childishness still is highlighted in that episode, Bato of the Water Tribe, episode 15 in book 1, where Katara and Sokka meet one of their father's friends. And, you know, that element of trust is sort of there with Aang. And it's also slightly broken because he knows how important Katara and Sokka are to him. And he sort of hides the map which would lead them back to their father. Also then fearing the fact that they're going to leave him, which is, you know, it's a very human emotion to feel, which then highlights the fact, you know, this guy's the Avatar, but he's also very much still a boy.
Yeah. And I think that's like, that you see that very much throughout the series, that he's just a kid. And he does struggle sometimes with it, being able to like accept and the responsibility that he's been given, and having to navigate through the world. And like really being forced to be more mature than what he wants to be. So he would rather just not worry about any of that stuff and just have fun. But that's obviously not the reality of the situation he's in. I feel like he's reluctant to be the Avatar, especially in this first book. You see it the most before he really steps into his own and accepts that responsibility. So yeah, he grows a lot more. Like, I don't know, I feel like I've said it so many times with all the characters, but he definitely, as the series goes on, he definitely grows a lot more into his Avatar role. But I definitely think in book one, he does take a fair few big strides of becoming who he needs to be.
Yeah, especially in those last few episodes, the Siege in the North, part 1 and part 2, where he does take that journey into the spirit realm. He meets Ko, and he's very sort of stoic in that situation, very ambitious in the drive that he needs to do. And then eventually, there's also those times where he just sort of taps into like ancestral power, and you'll see him just like slip into that pond and then come out as the eternal water spirit. And his natural ability to slip in and out of the spirit world definitely comes in handy at times too, and his connection and affinity to nature and various different spirits is highlighted through there as well. So he's like a character to me who hasn't seen book 2 and 3 as someone who's like budding with all this potential, and if he could use that on call, or if he could utilize that in a manner that's strategic, he's like going to be a really powerful and unstoppable sort of Avatar, rightly feared by the Fire Nation. And at this point in the episodes, I felt like the Avatar's reputation was more feared than Aang would be himself if they kind of knew who he was as a person and a boy. Yeah, but I kind of really like Zuko and Aang's dynamic as the series progresses in book 1 as well, because they fight on multiple occasions. That first fight you see in Zuko's quarters, Zuko's very aggressive towards him, and Aang is just dodging everything. And then as the series goes on, you can see as his fights with him develop, Aang becomes a little bit more sort of frontal and assaultive towards Zuko, and they have that back and forth. But then he realizes, actually, one of my sort of favorite episodes as well was the Blue Spirit episode, where Zuko is actually the Blue Spirit and he rescues Aang from being captured by Zhao, motivations aside. But there is that sort of relationship developing there, which I'm keen to see develop through book 2 and 3 as well.
Yeah, I think that's like really interesting. I also think just on that, when you said about the Avatar being feared, I definitely feel like because the Avatar is like, because Aang is an air nomad Avatar, right? So first of all, he's an air nomad. Like, I feel like he's an air nomad first, and then he's like the Avatar second. So he's not really a fighter. He's more, says he'll only fight as like self-defense if he really has to. But he tries to solve his problems by being quick and clever and thinking on his feet. He's even a vegetarian because he doesn't believe in like eating meat. You know what I mean? So like, I think, yeah, other Avatars definitely probably get the name. They probably are feared in a sense because a lot of other Avatars wouldn't have that same sort of worldly view that Aang has. He's a pacifist. He doesn't really like fighting. He won't actually look for a fight. He'll only defend himself if he absolutely has to. So with other Avatars in the past, they weren't shy about just absolutely destroying whoever they needed to bring back, world peace or keep everything in balance. And like you said, with Zuko and Aang, they do sort of really work well together. Like, yeah, the dualities of the characters, like crazy how they're sort of like walking the same sort of line, sort of going in opposite directions, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And they're also vastly different characters represented to us, but then we're brought back to the fact that they're very similar on occasion as well. As we've talked about before, with the weight of responsibility and the fact that they are just those caring sort of leaders. But we've covered all our characters now. Let's go into our last segment of our episode, which is the showstopper. So that is where we talk about our favorite scene/episode of the series, and we present them to one another. So did you want to go first for this one?
Yeah, sure. So my favorite episode of book 1. There's a lot of great moments in there, but it would either have to be the Storm episode, which we've already touched on. But if I had to pick another one, it'd probably be, I can't go off that finale. That finale always gives me chills when he goes to the spirit world with Ko, and then he finds out that the koi fish, the moon and ocean spirit, and then when he goes into that pond after the moon spirit's been taken out, and he goes like, no, it's not over. And then obviously sinks in and merges with the ocean spirit. Like, that's like just
Yeah, just the neon in that moment after, and the palette in that episode as well, where it's red across the screen for a moment because the moon's gone, and then it's black and white, and then the fire bending puffs bring back the light of it all.
Yeah,
it's really good.
That is amazing. Yeah, like especially when it's like the Zhao and Zuko fight at the end, and it's just like the only time you see colors is when the fire is illuminating their sort of outfits and stuff. And then the only other thing that's shining is Aang, that's merged with the ocean spirit. So like, yeah, just the actual like cinematography in that episode, it's just like so good. Just really, really good way to end out that book one.
Yeah. I think my favorite episode, we have talked about it before as well, is The Deserter, where Zhao is defeated because of his impatience, and Aang learns a lesson about, not always learning the quick way is best, and having to take time to be patient to learn the different sort of skills that he needs to. But if I had to pick another one, I think another favorite episode of mine would be the Blue Spirit episode. And I think that is because the motivations for Zuko were a little bit sort of fuzzy. He doesn't want Zhao to capture the Avatar, but I also feel like that's a developing sort of concept as to what's going to come for him. So I feel like that's the first episode where Aang and Zuko kind of come into an alliance, you might say, as opposed to Zuko always then tracking down Aang. So I like that episode because of the potential that it has. But my favorite episode of book one, Water Book, is the Deserter episode 16, because it really changed my perspective of firebenders to the point where they're now my favorite kind of bender.
Yeah, no, that's really cool, and I think that's like you said, there's a lot of great episodes in the series. Especially book one is probably my least favorite book out of all three. But I just think that the way this sort of develops, and the themes and the new characters we meet in the following books, it's crazy good. So I just cannot wait to get into that with you.
I know, and it's so good to see like all of these sort of elements, these themes, these world buildings, these character arcs. Like we can talk about this for an hour now, and it's all a children's cartoon, aged for people between like 9 and 14, but it has so much versatility to be watched by people of all different ages, and that's why it's probably one of the best cartoons. And I know on Rotten Tomatoes, it's got a 100% rating score. It's like 9.3,
I think, in IMDb.
But yeah, it's definitely high rated up there, and I can't wait to get into book 3 with you as well. It's something I'm going to keep on watching. So watch this Space Fandom Portals, people, because we will be diving into book 2 and book 3 later on in our episodes. Check out our social media.
Yeah, definitely.
And thank you so much for joining me, Luke. You've been an amazing guest, and it's great to talk this sort of stuff with you. So I'll appreciate having you on the show again. That's it for this week's episode of the Fandom Portals podcast. I want to thank you guys for tuning in as always, and I want to give a special thanks to Luke Newton, who is a very dear friend of mine who was absolutely awesome to have on the show. As we said in the podcast, guys, we will be doing book 2 and book 3 a little bit later on in our Fandom Portals journey, so stay tuned to our podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Overcast to make sure you catch them, and the return of Luke Newton as well. This has been the third installment in our first annual animation celebration here at Fandom Portals podcast, and next week marks the very last episode of this mini-series. So please come on in and join us for that in a week's time. I've been Aaron Davies. Connect with respect as always, guys, and we'll see you later.